So hello, everybody who's in attendance and everybody who's watching us. We're really thrilled to be live again at the Rady School of Management on the campus of UCSD in La Jolla, the magical place. And I couldn't be happier to welcome my dear friend Marilyn Tam to our broadcast today to talk about what her and I have termed maybe Leadership 2.0, the humanity of leadership. Marilyn needs no introduction. She's been on our shows many times in the past, but she has played senior executive roles at Nike, at Reebok. She was a CEO at Aveda, and now she's spreading happiness around the world. So, Marilyn, I couldn't be happier to be with you. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure.
I always like to start with you to get a pulse on the state of happiness in the world. All right? It's 2014. What do you see? What's going on in the world in terms of the fulfillment that you teach people?
Well, I think I want to backtrack a little bit and talk about why happiness is important, because for a lot of people in business, they seem to think that happiness is just something that is nice to have, but is not critical to life or to work or productivity, creativity, all the things that usually a conventional business measures first. And what I like to share is to give some raw statistics, definite concrete numbers so people can understand why happiness is so important and why the state of happiness in the world is critical in the whole equation of well-being, productivity, and all the different measures that we have. And so I'd like to quote some numbers first in the United States, since this is where we are located. Gallup research for 2013 reported that we lost, as a country, over $550 billion in productivity because of lack of happiness and lack of well-being in business. That's a huge number. I mean, it's going to make people wake up. $550 billion. And to answer your question, what's happening with happiness? In the last 40 years, and measured in the top 37 nations around the top, meaning more developed nations around the world, it's shown that happiness absolutely and relatively has gone down. So this is a big concern. And to add even a more of a perspective on it, the happiness, particularly in women, has gone down even steeper than men. So this is a call, I think, for us all to wake up and say, what are we doing? How come we are losing what we think should be a guaranteed right? This right in our Constitution, the pursuit of happiness. So something needs to be done, or at least we need to look at and say, what are we doing about our own happiness? Since now we know it's good for our creativity, productivity, and health.
So the pulse of happiness isn't that great then. Tell me what is contributing to that? What's the problem?
You know, I've read numerous studies, because, as you know, I am very focused on this. In fact, my last book, The Happiness Choice, which came out last year, is focused on this, on the aspects that bring happiness or not. And what we found, and there's numerous studies on happiness, or actually, I should say, the numerous studies on the lack of happiness and how we're supposed to get happy, and there's a different speculation on why, but the biggest one that I could pull out of all the studies is that our expectations and the pressure of life, particularly in the developing worlds, is pushing us to a pressure in a state that we forget what is really true for us, which is what is our reason for being. We've bought so much into what is supposed to make us happy through whether it's marketing, the image of who society as a whole, culture as a whole, uses our role models, and how far we are as individuals from those models is accentuating our lack of happiness.
Well, Marilyn, so ambition and happiness are not mutually exclusive.
Absolutely not.
Right? So how do I approach the world? You're speaking to a whole lot of entrepreneurs. You're speaking to the next generation of students who want to get out in the entrepreneurial world. That doesn't mean you can't be super ambitious to be happy. You just have to manage it accordingly, right?
You just have to understand what makes you happy. So then your ambition, in other words, your passion and your talent, when they're aligned, you're going to be happy. So a lot of people may have talent in some place, but they're not in line with what gives them the reason for being. They don't have that passion for it. I would suggest to reconsider. But each thing we do, and I interviewed a friend of mine yesterday who his title, among others, aside from CEO and entrepreneur and all that, is Daymaker. And he says that his whole organization, and he has about 400 and something employees, and they deal with about 50,000 clients a year. So it's, significant size business. But what he said was, and he has, it's a whole group of hair salons and spas. So I said, well, how do you justify what you're doing? Because I think, isn't that superficial about beauty? And how do people in the company be happy? Because if they're just serving tea and checking people and to get their hair done. And he said, it's not what they do, it's how you do it. So whatever you're doing, and he says the people who are serving tea, they're thinking that they are making the person's day. So if we feel that we are acknowledged, we're visible, we are who we are accepted to be, and then all of a sudden the life changes. So for him, he says, you can be happy doing whatever you're doing if you feel like that you are making a difference. So it goes back to what we're talking about. Are we aligned with our life purpose? So if you're ambitious, is the goal you're pursuing, or the goals you're pursuing, aligned with why you're here on the earth? And we all have a reason for being here.
I know you work really hard and you're very disciplined about your environment. You surround yourself with people who align with your purpose and your value. How do these people define, what is success to them? You ran a huge company, you were part of the acquisition of that big company. How do they define success? Is it just scorecard, or what is it?
I don't think it's one thing. I mean, in the traditional world, meaning in the last 100 years or so, it's almost like if you make more money, you're going to be happier. And then still very much the image in a lot of the world is that if you have more money, then you can buy more stuff. And then if you have more stuff, you can be happier. And since I speak and consult with Fortune 500 leaders around the world, I can tell you this right now, and you know this yourself. Having more stuff doesn't make you happier. It just makes you more stuff. That's about it.
Brings a little complexity.
Exactly. So the key is really just how do we align our desire to achieve, because we all have that. It's sort of almost inborn that we want to accomplish something. How do we align why we are doing what we're doing with what is making a difference for us? So somebody making a difference is to run a large company. But why do they want to run a large company? Because they maybe have more power to make bigger change. And then I know that's why I ran companies, because I felt like I had a bigger platform to make change, whether it is to change labor standards in apparel markets around the world, or helping indigenous tribes in the Amazon grow back some indigenous plants so that they have an ability to go back to the life they knew before Western people came in and created rubber plantations or acres and acres and acres of cattle, which is also not indigenous to their culture and to their life. So it's just a matter of saying, how do you find your platform? Where are you happy? And how do you express your desire to be who you are in the world? And it changes for everybody, whether you're just bringing tea and checking somebody in to get their hair done, or whether you're running a Fortune 100 company.
Marilyn, you always reference that when you talk about happiness, you reference that happiness doesn't necessarily mean eliminating all the negatives from your life, because that means your life would be one-dimensional. And that's a big myth about happy people, is that they don't have complexity or negative things going on in their life, which is not true. Mm-hmm. They just deal with it differently.
Exactly. Because we all have challenges, and because actually if we don't have challenges, how will we know the good stuff? Because everything would be just even insane. So what I tell people, and for myself too, because I've had big setbacks in my life, And it's to say, how do I learn and accept what is? And then once I accept what is, doesn't mean I just say, okay, I'm going to do nothing about this miserable situation, whatever way you might call it. But how do I deal with the situation so that I can take the lesson that is in here, as well as learn from it so that I can do better next time, as well as say, what is the blessing here? How can I go from here to the next level of happiness? Because in the cloudy day, we know the sun is shining. And we're happy for the cloudy day, especially now in California, hoping for rain. But also, we celebrate when the sun is shining because we do like that cheery outlook. So it's understanding both and knowing that they both come, but not be dwelling on the negative, but understanding, accepting it, and dealing with it in a way that's positive and able to give us the wisdom and lessons that each experience holds.
And that's really, really sound advice. But you know that is really hard. That is really hard, right? Especially for these young students that are sitting here today that are about to conquer the world. That's a lifetime of work.
Yes. And I have to, and I want to encourage them to say, yes, there are times when you think the world's ended. I remember when I was in grad school and I was doing my research with a doctoral candidate. I was getting my master's at that time, and with a doctoral candidate, and he, because he was a little bit ahead of me time-wise in getting his work done, he took all my research and put it in his thesis, in his dissertation, which meant I had to start from scratch again. And to me, it was devastating because it set me back several months to redo new research to get to where it was. And I remember my professor telling me, well, God will not send you anything that you can't deal with. And I thought, what makes you think that God, what makes you think that I can deal with this? This is devastating. It's the end of the world. And then later, now that I have some perspective, I realized that my thesis was so much better because I did dive deeper into what was really core for me, how to really help the low-income rural people that I was working on, because my master's in economics. And it took me some time back, and actually it was great because I was a little bit more mature and more prepared to go onto the work world because I was so young going through the process. I didn't finish high school, into college halfway through high school. So even holding me back a few months probably was good in the long run, but at the time when I'm eager and ready to go, I didn't want to wait. I want to be out there doing things. But then to realize, ultimately, it really made a difference. But at the time, it was devastating. It was the end of the world.
It was the end of the world. You just have to have a little bit of faith and just believe that something better is going to come out of it. One more question. I want to pivot to kind of entrepreneurship and leadership for a moment. When you found yourself, or when you find yourself now in a rut, or when you find yourself stuck in the middle of an important project, how do you get out of it?
The first thing I do, and I've written about it in my Huffington Post blog, so if anybody wants to dig and get it. The first thing that you do is pause, because the frustration when we face is usually we try to just, push through whatever it is. The first thing I just say is pause and take assessment of what's going on. Why is it not going through? Is there something you're doing? Is it something somebody else is doing? Is it something in the situation, the greater situation? Is it the economics of the world? Is it the weather? Whatever it is, pause and take assessment of all the things that's going on. After you do that, then say, okay, devise and learn how to deal with the situation. If it is just time, you've just taken some time. If it is an objection from outside, delve into why there is an objection. Delve into why there's reasons for it not happening. Or if it is something within yourself where you're ambivalent and you're fighting against yourself, that can also come through. Then develop action consensus with whoever all you're working with, and even maybe some people you think are the ones who are fighting against you. Create some kind of consensus or new partnership, whatever level you can, and make it happen, because then you can respond instead of react. Then there's a much better chance, because you've risen up another level to look at the situation and from a higher perspective, assess it, devise new solutions, collaborate with more people and bigger network, then you have a much better chance of moving forward. Or conversely, realize that where you're going is not really where you need to, because that sometimes we forget when we're moving so fast and pushing so hard, we could be going the wrong way too. So having that pause and taking these steps make all the difference in the success of whatever that you're looking at.
It's really interesting you bring that up. The person that's featured today on our website is just a dynamic Stanford professor who teaches people to prepare for their talks before they get on the TED stage. And that's his secret weapon. I said, if there's a secret weapon, he said, it's one word: pause, and you capture your breath. Obviously, it's easy for people to see why at heart you're an entrepreneur, you're a leader, you've led, Fortune 500 companies. When did you first realize you had what it took to lead big, massive companies like that and to start small companies that ultimately became big companies?
I guess I have to say this. I have never been prepared for anything I've done. And that might sound shocking, but if we are 100% prepared for doing whatever we want to do, that is too small of a stage for you. So always take the leap. And I always said, well, my childhood was not actually a positive experience, and I was told that I was worthless. So instead of thinking that I'm worthless, I said, well, what's the opposite? If I can't be worthless, so I must be worth everything. So I just took that thing and flipped it on its head, and I said, I can do anything. Because if they thought that I'm worth nothing and I'm still around, I must be worth something. And so what's the next step? I can try anything. I can take the risk and go forward. So it's just looking at the situation and just say, what is the next big thing that I can do within my range? So whether I was 11 years old deciding that I was going to help save all of Africa by
good goal.
teaching them how to feed themselves and run their government, or deciding to run a company, it's one step by step. So whatever it is that you want, there's a process to it. So when I decided I was going to help Africa, I said, well, I better get a degree in foods and nutrition, so teach them how to feed themselves, get a degree in economics so that I can teach them how to run the government. So the process is there once you have a big goal. How do you get there? So it's whatever your goals are, just get a way of saying, okay, if this is where I want to go, this huge scope, how do I take them down into walk-sized pieces? Just one step at a time, I'll get there.
Marilyn, I think there are a whole bunch of people in the world who would love to think big, who would love to have great ambition, but they let the fear get in the way. So when fear gets in the way, how do you handle it?
Well, and the first thing is to admit it, because a lot of people just try to deny it, and then it just grows. It's like anything, if you try to push it down, it keeps coming up. So for me, it's like, this is scary. Admit it is scary. So then go through the worst case scenarios. I can fail at it. I can not get the job. I may be, whatever it is, list all the reasons why you're scared. Look at them all and say, well, how probable are each one of these things? And then when you go through that, it denatures the fear, because you realize that all the worst fears that you have probably aren't going to happen because you've done things to make sure that it doesn't happen. Because you made contingencies, you've done other provisions. And if you haven't, here's a good time for you to look at that and say, how can I make sure that my worst fears don't come about? Because once you get to the point where you're actually looking at it and saying, these are my fears, then you're already in the conscious, active stage of neutralizing them and making them really not to be bothered with, because you've got a place to go that's going to make your success happen.
Well, when you were brought into Aveda, you were brought in for a specific purpose, to turn a really successful company into an extraordinary company, to turn a domestic company into a global company. Take me to the first couple of days. What was it like for you?
It was a little scary, because I realized what I had. It was a beautifully successful company. It was only in the United States at the time. It was run by a very charismatic leader, an owner, founder, who has had a tremendous challenge letting go, and also at the same time really wants to let go. So before I came on, there had been 5 presidents in the last 3 years. So it was not a particularly secure place to be. And he made me CEO. So he actually stepped aside and said, okay, I'm going to let you run this. But then, of course, there's this push-pull. I'm here, I'm not here. I trust you, I don't trust you. And this is my baby. And what are you doing? So it was a situation assessing what's really true, who's really motivated to create the change that Horst, the founder, wanted. And what he wanted to do is make it a global company and then sell it, because he wanted to retire, but he wanted to sell it in the place where he was going out flying high. And also to make sure that it stays true to its roots. So there was a certain number of things to do, and he had a time frame because he was turning 50 and he didn't want to be there when he was 55. So it was going to be under 5 years and preferably 2 or 3. So
no pressure at all, right? No pressure for you.
So it was a lot of things going on, but it's like, okay, what do we have here? We have a tremendous brand. We have commitment and loyalty internally from for all the people working there, as well as from the clients. So those are the good things. What we also have is a company that's really run as a family with a dysfunctional father who would run hot and cold. He would be really loving and kind, and then next thing he's just go like, you didn't do it my way, I'm going to fire you. And he does. Oh. So
we know some people like that.
It was very difficult to find a place to everybody feel that this is stable. This is something that's going to have some legacy. It's going to go forward in a way that the good is going to last, and the things that are human about it, the temperamental swings, are just the human nature, and that can be just regarded as that. But the system and the structure is something solid that can move forward. And so that was my vision and what I needed to do to transmit that vision to the team and to our clients and ultimate customer, that this company believes in what it is about and it's going to follow through in a way that is going to be long lasting.
And the end result was spectacular. You had a whole bunch on your plate. How did you define your priorities?
By first assessing and understanding what the mission is. Like everybody else, everything we do, we have to understand where is the ultimate goal. What's our life mission? What's our company mission? And those two should be aligned. And then making sure that everybody in the company, as well as everybody you work with, is aligned to the same mission. Because if we all know where North Point is, it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're south, east, north, west, wherever you are, you know where north is, you can get there. Or if the whole company say we're going to go now north, northeast, wherever you are, you can also realign knowing where north is to get to north, northeast. So that's the first thing, is establish the company mission, establish it so that everybody within the company and all of our customers and vendors understand that too, and make sure we're all moving in the same direction. Then everything, the priorities fall out from there. If you know what the mission is, then your priorities are going to go along with what the mission is. So it helps eliminate any confusion and discussion about which is more important. We know then what is important.
You're like a great athlete. You make it seem so easy, but when you get out there, it's so difficult. I want to pause for a second and see if anybody has any. I want to ask you one more question, and I want to invite our audience to ask a question. But my question to you is about just how did you define yourself as a leader, right? You and I talk about that a lot. What type of leader were you?
There's so many different people who say, oh, I'm a servant leader and this and that. I honestly think that to be a leader, you have to lead. You take input, and I have to give credit to a former boss of mine, the CEO of Reebok, when I was president there. And he used to say, this is democracy. I listen to all of you and we have the vote until it's not. And that's really what I think a leader is.
Absolutely.
You take and you create together, and then at some point you have to make decisions. And it may be a hard decision and maybe one that may not be the most popular. But once we need to galvanize everybody to move same direction. So at some time in the operation, you have to lead.
And when that time comes, you got to just do it.
That's right.
Right? Anybody have any questions? Yes.
Yes. In your experience in these large companies like Aveda and Reebok, when you're trying to align with your peers as well as add a little happiness to get things moving forward in the right direction, do you have resistance by either a strong present culture at that company, or how do you get around that?
Did you hear that, Marilyn?
I think I've got most of it, but why don't you repeat just to make sure, please?
Well, the whole point of it, when you're leading, why don't you come up and ask her a question so you can see these bright young leaders of tomorrow here. The leaders of yesterday are going to step away. The leaders of tomorrow are going to come up.
Hopefully I put a good face to the
Relevant.
future. Hello, Marilyn.
Hi.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, how do you institute your ideas about happiness and alignment when you're making big decisions for a large company and it may conflict with a present corporate structure or culture?
Well, to answer your question about how do you make a change, that's really what you're talking about, from whatever is existing to something new, knowing that there might be resistance or fear or skepticism about what you're doing. Mm-hmm. The first thing you need to do is the knowledge is there. Acknowledge whatever is there and listen to them out. So it's not like ignoring them, just say, okay, I recognize this is what way you've done it before, and I see that these are some of the positives of this. The reason why we see that there's more potential in whatever it is that you're advocating, show them that and bring them to it by acknowledging first where they are and what success they've had, but also acknowledge where they might have been some less than ideal results, and show some concrete reasons why it has to be. And sometimes you can't make a major change right away. Maybe you start with a division, maybe you start with a department, maybe you start with one area and to move it through. But you let them know that this is what we are going to do, and that's the way we're headed. So it's a measure of being very acknowledging, collaborative, and also showing that there's other alternatives to what's been happening before. But ultimately, you are making a decision.
Great. Awesome. Thank you.
Anybody else got questions? Yes, come on up.
Hi, Marilyn. My name is David. Hi. I'm just wondering, in your decision making as a leader, how do you find a balance between intuition and reasoning, going with gut instinct versus looking at all the data and maybe going against that data? Because sometimes they don't always complement each other. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and this is a great question because it happens all the time. You know, the data might say, take it this way, this direction, and then something in you is saying, well, that doesn't make sense. And that time it goes back to what we said, pause for a minute and say, why is there such a discord here? Is there something I'm missing? And in that pause, either your what you would call instinct or gut will show up more practical reasons. And usually, if that is the case, it usually comes to something about whether it's ethical, socially, environmentally responsible or something like that, and where it's going as compared to the numbers. And then you're gonna say, make the decision. And I know where I always go. It's like, it has to be where it feels like it's ethical, it's responsible, and it's gonna be long lasting. And so sometimes, it's like, I'll give you a good example. When I started doing, changing the labor laws in apparel manufacturing, everybody within the company, including my own CFO, as well as all my factories that were working with me, were against it. But yet, I felt like this is the ethical, responsible thing to do. So we took steps one at a time to get there. It took us almost 3 years to change everything around. But the point is, the statistics and everything told us that you're going to lose money if you change it this way. But somehow something in me said, I think we're going to make money changing it. And ultimately, we made money changing it and changed the industry. But so you have to listen to what's making you pause and not want to do it, and say, is this just fear, or is that some good, ethical, reasonable thing to be pausing and trying to find the real reason? So it's getting to that point. Instead of reacting, just going, how can I really assess what's going on here? Help?
Yep, that's all. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to ask you one last question, all right? And our time is actually right up, but one last question. As I mentioned, these young entrepreneurial leaders of the future can look at the future that has a whole lot of uncertainty and get really excited about it, or they can get really scared about it. What advice would you have for them to leave this MBA program and do great things in the world?
First of all, you're living in the most exciting time in the history of humankind. So, of course, it's kind of scary, but it's the most exciting time because things are changing faster than it's ever done before. And with that means whatever you do can have a bigger impact quicker and more a greater scope than it's ever before. So just feel excited that you have the potential to change the world and quickly. So with that, feel good about that. Feel good about that, and also recognize that with that power comes some caution. Know that your impact is so big, then just choose wisely. Make sure that you're doing something that really aligns with your passion and your purpose, because otherwise you're making change and you don't really care about them. So then really it's a waste. It's a waste of your talent, your energy, and your life, as well as for the world.
Marilyn, you're one of the best people I know. Where do you want everybody to go and learn more about the work that you're doing?
They can get on my website, which is very simple, MarilynTam.com. I have several books out, and I also have a radio show. It's called The Happiness Choice, just like my latest book. And if you want to look up my radio shows for all of my shows, it's just go on Google or whatever and just put in Marilyn Tam radio show, and it just shows up. And so my website, MarilynTam.com. My books, which are also, of course, available on my site, my radio show. I have a blog on Huffington Post, and just, again, Marilyn Tam, Huffington Post, it shows up, so it's pretty easy. And write me, MarilynTam at MarilynTam.com.
And I have a feeling that this chapter of your life is going to be far more significant than the last one. As always, thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks, Mo.